Hi and welcome to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. If you like crime consistency, then I'm your girl. I release content on a Wednesday and a Sunday at the same time, same place, every single week. So get yourself notified by subscribing. Give me a like if you like my content, give me a comment, I read them all. I really appreciate all of you who are returners, and thanks again to all my lovely Patreon fans. You are appreciated massively. Today's case I'm going to cover because I've been on TV talking about it this week. Basically, it's going to be about Wayne Couzens, who has murdered Sarah Everard. At least so far we know that he's murdered Sarah Everard, but he could well have killed other people as well. We're going to talk about that today. I'm going to go through what we know and also look at how the investigation played out, and of course, thoughts, prayers, and just incredible sadness and empathy are with Sarah Everard's family. An incredible young life, tragically stolen. She was an unbelievably lovely human being, and hopefully we're going to do her justice today, whilst also exploring the brutality of Wayne Couzens and the failures that undoubtedly we need to explore that have taken place within this case. Sarah was born in Surrey in 1987. She grew up in York, and that's where she attended the Fulford School. She was only 33 when she was abducted, raped and murdered by Wayne Couzens. And to add insult to injury in this case, Wayne Couzens was actually a serving Metropolitan Police Constable and a firearms officer. Any of you out there who know about firearms officers, they have been through rigorous training. And you would also imagine that they'd have gone through rigorous background checks. We're going to be exploring those and whether they happened or otherwise later on. So Sarah Everard, who was she and what was she described like? Well, she was described as a really intelligent, resourceful, talented, much loved young woman. She was also absolutely beautiful. She looked like the perfect English rose when you see pictures of her, with a smile that was inviting and kind and showed a generosity of spirit. That's just from the pictures that you see of her. It's quite clear that that's the case. She was really popular. She had a great circle of friends, and she'd been working in marketing since she'd graduated from Durham University. So she was a very bright young woman. And she'd only recently started a new job when she was working as a marketing manager at a digital agency. So she was somebody with huge prospects and who'd obviously done very, very well career-wise. She had lived in London for a long time, and one of the things that people who know her say about her is she was really streetwise. She was an individual who knew how to protect herself, and she was aware of common threats and dangers, and was an individual who was confident enough to walk where she walked. She was used to being outside. She was used to feeling safe in the world around her, but she was somebody who did understand that there are always threats. When we look at the perpetrator of this crime, he's 48-year-old Wayne Couzens. He was born on the 20th of December 1972. We can say that when you look at his history, people would argue that he'd previously been of good character. He had 2 children, and he'd been working for the Met Police for 3 years. He had, previous to that, though, been a member of the Kent Special Constabulary. He then moved to the Civil Nuclear Constabulary in 2011. That's a special police force which is basically responsible for providing law enforcement and security at nuclear sites. I know, who knew that there are special forces in places like nuclear sites? I guess it makes sense. You don't want bad things happening in nuclear sites. It could be quite dangerous, but I'd never thought about it. But that's where he was positioned. But then he joined the Met Police in September 2018. And since February 2020, this is going to be like, because it just says something to me. When individuals like this get into positions like this, that there is something significantly wrong about process. But I'll let you make your minds up over what you think when I talk about this next job. So 2020, he worked for the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. That's right, a Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command officer, and he was an authorised firearms officer, so he had access to guns. He also participated in COVID patrols, ensuring that regulations were enforced. We've probably all seen on TV, or some of us may even have been to protests. And we've witnessed the kind of individuals that are sometimes used in those protests to manage the crowds aren't very nice. Just going to put it out there. I was brought up in the era where police are here to serve and protect people like me, not to bully and aggress. But it seems that at times the police maybe overstep their power balance. And certainly we've seen that with the COVID patrols in the UK. Not quite as bad as Melbourne. I mean, there is a whole heap of crazy what the police are allowed to do. And obviously we've seen other issues in Europe where the police are very heavy-handed. But nonetheless, what do you think of when you think of a police officer? You think they're here to protect you. You think they're the person that you would run to in a state of emergency when you required help. And for the most part, even though I can be negative about certain elements of policing and behaviours, that is what they stand for. You want to call them when you're in trouble, which is what makes this case so diabolical. Also, this particular job that I've just mentioned, that put him in a perfect situation because it meant that he was armed, right? And also he was a police officer and he was somebody with access to things like handcuffs. And he was an individual who knew certain aspects of the law. And it's a very confusing time right now out there because up until a couple of years ago, when you're wandering down the street, you know that if a police officer comes up and tries to arrest you, they're going to have to have a really good reason why they're going to want to do that. Like, they have to have a really good reason to stop and search you, to PNC you, let alone to say, I'm going to put handcuffs on you. But ask yourself this, how many of us really know the COVID regulation? All the laws that have been sneaked in. I mean, they are numerous. And how many of us feel really confident in knowing how to refuse authority? And I say that because there are so many psychological research papers and exercises where we see that positions of authority have an opportunity to make people in the public domain feel that they have to act a certain way. I did a first series that was ever on television, which was called The People Watchers, and it was all about psychological tricks on the public to make them do what we wanted them to do. And it's unbelievable. Even wearing a tabard, a yellow tabard, would make people do things that were ridiculous just because I was asking them and I had a clipboard and I made myself sound like I had authority. So we are born to some degree and brought up in our society to follow, to abide, to be moral. And the past few years has thrown everything into chaos because we're not sure what we're meant to be allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. And that puts us in a really vulnerable situation. Ask yourself, how many of you right now would feel completely confident if a police officer came up to you and tried to put handcuffs on you to actually resist that? Because your first instance is to think, what have I done wrong? It's like if somebody stops me with a breathalyzer, even if I've not had a drink for like 6 years, I'll be convinced that I've definitely done it and that I'm absolutely the kind of person that's going to need to be thrown into a jail cell. I just have that guilt complex, and I know a lot of us do, because our implication of being around a police officer is to automatically feel like, hang on, they've got more power than me, maybe I'm doing something wrong. So you have to set that up when you think about the crime that we're going to cover today. He's automatically in a position of authority. I am going to be able to explain the evidence against Wayne Couzens today because it was absolutely damning. When we explore the mistakes that he made, they were numerous. So we have mobile phone location services on, which meant that lots and lots of his mobile pings occurred within mass in the area. He had CCTV against him, so there was a real watertight case against him. And because of this, inevitably, when it came down to the trial, he pleaded guilty. Now, on one level, I will say this has saved Sarah Everard's family, the ordeal of the trial. No one wants to watch somebody go through that when you know that they're already dealing with a highly significant traumatic loss. But it also means to some degree that I'm not going to be able to explain in micro detail what happened to Sarah and how she was murdered, because obviously the prosecution would outline that, and that won't be possible because he did plead guilty. But I'm glad he pled guilty. Her family have been through enough per se. But what we are going to be able to explore in detail is the amount of planning that Couzens put into this crime, because that's what makes it particularly terrifying. And I want you to think about the background of things like organised serial killers when we explore this. So somebody who's put a huge amount of meticulous detail into carrying out a crime. Because this was not spur of the moment. This wasn't a random killing that somebody suddenly spontaneously engaged in. This was a highly organised offence, and he had planned it. He planned it meticulously for a period of time. That's from the kidnapping of Sarah to the murder of Sarah and then to the disposal of Sarah's body. We believe that he spent at least a month before the murder travelling to London to perfect his plan. Again, think about offenders like Dennis Rader, BTK. This is the kind of behaviour that we see in serial killers. They meticulously explore how to perfect the crime, and also they engage in a high level of fantasy experience. Think about Edward Kemper, the kind of person who went looking and picking up hitchhikers, constantly building his repertoire until he actually struck. So there's a level of that cohesion to what they want to do, but it's also because they're enjoying the playing with the idea of who they're going to hurt and how they're going to do it for a long period of time before they get to the point of the offence. Wayne Couzens had actually travelled to the capital on the 23rd of January, the 5th of January, and the 14th of February. It makes it even more sinister when you think that on the 14th of February, where most people are going around giving gifts to their loved ones, sending cards, or forgetting and getting in serious trouble for not sending a card, for Valentine's Day, right? It's a lover's day. And there he is, plotting a crime, a murder, on a day where really, considering he's in a relationship and with kids, he should be dedicating it to his partner. And that sets us up, doesn't it, with an understanding of the ego level that he's got. Also, when it comes down to the details of the planning, he bought tools that he needed to carry out the offence. And those tools were plastic sheeting, a handcuff key, self-adhesive carpet protector film, and hairbands. So he's building a kill kit. It was never established what the carpet protector was used for in the actual commission of the crime, but what they do believe the hairbands were for was to either restrain Sarah or even to potentially help him maintain an erection. So it's why people wear cock rings, because it makes them maintain the erection for longer and it makes ejaculation more challenging, which means that the person can perpetrate that particular activity for a longer period of time, which is chilling to imagine. But again, if that's the case, that ego, that this is all about me, that is, I want to carry out this crime in this way and I want it to last as long as possible, it does play into that psyche of an individual like him. Now, it's clear that Couzens' plan was to abduct, rape, and to murder a woman with that kit. It's not a rape that went wrong. You don't go out and buy those materials to do that. You go out and rape somebody, and if you accidentally kill them, it's still murder, but the point is, it's not murder in the premeditated sense. Wayne Couzens definitely wanted to murder a woman. And also, be aware what was going on, that he had planned this so well to imagine that this was a first offence. And I'm going to say that right now, because I do not believe that Wayne Couzens is an offender who's only carried this out once. There's so many details in the way that he approaches this that, to me, it's disturbing, and I think potentially we could find that Wayne Couzens is responsible for the murders. We might never find that out, but there are lots of women that go missing and they don't turn up. And when you find somebody who's orchestrated a crime like this, you have to think to yourself, okay, well, where else has he been? And what other women have gone missing in those areas? Also, when he orchestrated the crime, he was really aware that his Seat was an old car, and also that that old car was a bit too untidy, a bit too battered to be considered a police vehicle, which would be used by an officer on duty. And he felt that clearly, if his victim saw that he had this battered old car, it would be very unlikely that she'd get into it willingly, because it's going to make you think as a victim, hang on a minute, this police officer's come to tell me that I've got to be arrested, but he's putting me in a private old car. That doesn't feel like it fits. So to manage that psychology of the victim, he wants to make sure that he looks like the car that he's in is going to be one of a level that they would expect to see. And also, we've got to say that he wouldn't want his own car to be seen in the area when he actually wants to abduct the victim there, because that's going to tie him to the crime. Again, level of organisation, chilling. So because of that, he hires a car. And the whole premise of this is that he's going to abduct his victim and transfer her to his own car later. He therefore parks his own vehicle in Dover. And he was quite clever in where he placed it. He put it in a really quiet spot away from houses, so it's less likely to get picked up. People aren't going to be thinking, oh, that's an unusual car parked outside my house. He was clearly aware that he had to create distance between, one, where he'd abducted his victim, and two, where he transfers his victim from the hire car to his own car, because he doesn't want witnesses. And being away from people and houses mean that if she starts to resist in that instance, it's going to be more challenging for him in a public area to deal with it than in a private area. And clearly, for any victim, if you're suddenly realising that you're getting moved from one car to an old battered one by a guy who's meant to have arrested you and has driven you miles, you're going to be in a state of distress, right? So he hires a car, a white Vauxhall, and that's on the 28th of February, and then he drives it to London on the 3rd of March. In that car, he takes items of his police kit, and that is all to help him carry out the offence. He even takes his warrant card. So he is prepped. He lies to his family and he says he's going to work at a night shift on the 3rd of March. So that's going to be really easy to pull off. You're in the force. Of course people are going to believe you. One, you're a police officer. Do I immediately trust you? Well, kind of, because I think you're paid to be trusted. Secondly, completely common for somebody to be called in to a night shift. I am not going to be suspecting you at all as a partner. What we do know is that, of course, that was a ruse. He didn't visit his place of work at the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command base on Lily Road. Instead, he had a plan, and he was going to work that plan. All he needed was a victim. He'd got everything else. He'd gone through every element of this crime. He knew what he was going to do, where he was going to do it, how he was going to do it, and he had the items with which he was going to do it with. He was so organised, and the only thing missing is that person that he can use to fulfil his fantasy. He drives around excessively, basically, constantly, scouting the capital, and he's looking for that one individual, that one person that stands out to him, that desirability level. He wants them to be available. He can make them vulnerable. He's a police officer. And he wants that desirability, somebody who fits what it is that his particular MO desires. And for Sarah, that beautiful young woman, it's the wrong time, wrong place. That's it. On the 3rd of March, all she is doing is walking home. It's mid-evening, so she's not late. It's just an ordinary day. She's walking back to Brixton. She'd actually visited a friend in Clapham Junction, which is South London, and it was during the COVID pandemic, which we all know has made it more challenging because things are quieter. People aren't out as often. And that, unfortunately, gives Wayne Couzens, again, ammunition to carry out this crime. Often we forget about the collateral damage of what's happened in the last 18 months, 19 months. But there is collateral damage. You know, domestic homicide in the UK is pretty much doubled. Child abuse has gone through the roof. Child death has gone up by 25%. Let's not pretend there is not collateral damage of this particular issue with lockdowns and restrictions. And whilst we can't absolutely attribute Sarah's death to this, of course not, Wayne Couzens is the reason that she died. Nonetheless, the streets becoming quieter has definitely given options to people who ordinarily wouldn't be able to carry out those crimes because they're busy. So that in itself is another element to this crime that could have been prevented. So Sarah Everard leaves her friend's house on Leithwaite Road around 9 p.m. that evening. So it's early on. En route home, she's chatting to her boyfriend. She's arranging to meet her boyfriend the next day. But the truth is, she never makes it home. She never makes that meeting with that boyfriend. She's last seen wearing a green rain jacket, navy blue trousers with a white diamond pattern and turquoise and orange trainers. And it seems that as she's walking back, Couzens sees her, spots her by the roadside. And bus CCTV footage captured in Poinders Road, Belham, actually shows him approaching Ms Everard at 9:34 p.m. And he can be seen pointing to his belt and putting his arm out towards Sarah, and then he handcuffs her. Now again, just put yourself in that position that Sarah Everard was in. He's pointing to his belt. We know he's got his ID. He's got handcuffs. He'll know the spiel. And she's confused. But at the same time, how do you refuse authority? And it's believed that he falsely arrests her at this point, saying that she had breached the restrictions on movement that were being enforced during that stage of the pandemic. And I completely understand why she did that, why she accepted that. Because most of us haven't got a clue what we're allowed to do or not allowed to do. And the fact that she was walking from her friends, maybe she thought, well, maybe I should feel guilty. Maybe I have done something wrong. She's not thinking, my God, this is some psychopath who's about to murder me. She's imagining that this is an individual in authority and that she is well behaved. You see, that's the problem, isn't it? So many of us have been brought up to be quiet, accept authority, not make a scene, be behaved. Our society tells women to do that all the time, to comply. We should be told not to comply. Sarah Everard should have been told not to comply, but our society doesn't like women who don't do that. And again, that's not the family's fault, that's not Sarah Everard's fault, that's our society's fault and the way that we treat women. And the truth is, in that moment, she would have felt like she had no other option. So many of us would feel like that. If Sarah Everard's legacy is going to be one thing, it's that we listen to how compliance can end in disaster for us. And that women particularly need to find their voice in these circumstances and situations, because it's offensive that we're in scenarios where people in power can do this to us. A passing car went past Sarah Everard being arrested and they see it happening. They see Couzens handcuffing Sarah's hand behind her back. So again, that completely immobilises her, doesn't it? When you've got your hands behind your back, you're completely restricted. They witnessed her being arrested and all they thought was, that's an undercover police officer arresting a young woman. Of course, that's what I'd have thought. And that is exactly how Couzens wants it to look. Because you're only going to pay minimal attention to it. It happens all the time. People get stopped for drugs, people get stopped for shoplifting, people get stopped because they've got a warrant out. There are all these things. And like I said, COVID has added so many flames to this situation because of the fact that people aren't aware what is right and what is wrong right now. It's at this point, Sarah gets put in the hire car and he drives her 80 miles. An 80-mile journey from London to where he's parked his own vehicle in Dover. I don't even want to imagine where she was psychologically. Because you know, hang on a minute, this guy's arrested me. It's London. There are lots of police stations around here. The protocol would be to take me to a police station around here. And suddenly we're on a motorway and then we're going to a completely different area and it's Dover and you're going to be imagining this is not making sense. She would have been growing in fear. And we don't know what he was saying to her in that car. Part of his fantasy might have been to completely ignore her and give her the silent treatment to build her fear. Part of it may have been telling her what he was going to do to her. That might have been part of his fantasy. Maybe he was appeasing her and saying it was all going to be okay. This is just what had to happen, just to make sure that she remained calm, because he didn't want to draw attention to her in his car being hysterical, for example. But whatever happened, she was a very bright woman. She would have realised that something was seriously amiss. She was 5'4", really slim build. Think about who she was up against at this moment in time. She's also handcuffed. She wouldn't have stood a chance. That's the absolute horrifying situation that we're dealing with. This slight young woman against this strong man who's made sure that she couldn't resist because she's handcuffed. They then get to Dover and he swaps cars. So at this moment in time, she is going to absolutely know that something dreadful is going to befall her. And at some point during midnight and 1:45, he basically drives her to a remote woodland in the village of Siebertswald and he rapes her. Now, we don't know exactly where and when Couzens then murdered Sarah. It's unclear time frame wise, but we do know that he strangled her to death. And he strangled her to death likely with his police belt. His police belt. Again, what does that say to you about the power play here? That belt is meant to be given to somebody to serve and protect. You wear it knowing that you are there for the public interest. And he took that off and he strangled her with it. When the expert testimony was brought in to explore how and when she died, one of the things that they said was that belt would have needed to have been applied for about 2 minutes before it killed her. I don't know how you guys feel, but certainly for me, if you're in pain or you're afraid, 10 seconds feels like a lifetime. To know that that poor girl in that situation would have struggled for 2 minutes is reprehensible, terrifying, and utterly, utterly diabolical and devastating for her family. They don't know whether she was murdered before she was raped or after she was raped or during the fact that she was being murdered. That isn't something that we are aware of, but nonetheless, at some point, either before he raped her or after he raped her, she was murdered. He then drove around the Dover area for quite a long time, and then he stopped to buy soft drinks at the BP Dover South services. That's 2:34 a.m. We've got to be able to, I think at this point, presume that Sarah was already dead. Also, it's worth noting that when they looked at the DNA evidence, it suggested that he'd used Velcro straps to restrain her. So they have evidence to see DNA-wise that that must have been part of what happened to her as well. At 8:14 a.m, he goes and buys a hot chocolate and a Bakewell tart in Dover, which just chills me so badly. This is when you think about psychopathy, right, in its real core way. You know, the diagnosis and the understanding of what we'd expect to see behaviour rise in an individual like this. That's what you expect. He's murdered a poor innocent woman, raped her, strangled her. He's gone through this whole experience of playing out his fantasy, and then what does he do? He goes and buys a hot chocolate and a Bakewell tart. He just has a bit of a treat. How could you even stomach that? And at this point as well, he's got to dispose of Sarah's body. So he's able to eat that treat whilst dealing with this big situation that he's got to deal with now, which is the removal and disposal of Sarah Everard's body. And his planning was relatively extensive, you know, and to some degree there was sophistication there. So he got Sarah Everard's mobile phone and he removed the SIM card because he knows that obviously he doesn't want people to be picking up her actual connection. The day after her murder, he drives to Sandwich and throws her mobile phone in the river. So again, making it very difficult for people to know where she is. And again, identifying that if they find the mobile phone in the river, is that going to throw people off course as to where her body might be? That actually does get recovered by police divers. And I will say the police investigation was freaking extensive, really extensive. So he throws the phone in the river and then he drives home. And he had calculated the time that it was going to take. And that time coincided perfectly with the usual time that he'd arrive home after a night shift. So he's going to walk in and his partner's going to be like, this is normal, nothing to see here. What is very telling is that the people who saw him after the crime said he was absolutely normal. Nothing stood out. He didn't seem stressed, anxious, didn't seem like quiet. Just everything was completely normal. He even booked the kids in for a dental appointment. The fact that so many people as well said this guy just seemed completely normal demonstrates, again, that insight into psychopathy. If you don't have empathy and guilt, then you can act however you want, because in your conscience, you can do what you like. You can kill. It's just completely part of your psyche. So you're not going to stand out. We know that on the 5th of March, he took a plastic container to a fuel station and he filled it with 5 litres of petrol. Again, arguably we can say that's not very sophisticated. It's full of CCTV, and why are you filling a tank with 5 litres of petrol? Doesn't make sense. But nonetheless, he's obviously felt that he's put some distance between him and the potential of that crime being discovered. It's him being the main culprit to get away with doing this. He then travels to an area of woodland, which is worth noting that he actually owned it. It's in Hodes Wood in Kent, and here he leaves Sarah's body and he puts her in this abandoned fridge, which is beyond disrespectful. And I know that obviously what he'd done was beyond disrespectful, beyond inhumane anyway, but there is always that part of me when you think about a human being of such meaning of such gravitas with her family and her friends, with her boyfriend, this human being of absolute inherent worth. People would have laid down and died for this girl because she had such great impact in their world. And what does he do? He takes a body that he's already decimated and he puts her in an abandoned fridge. And if that isn't grotesque enough, he then burns the body and all the incriminating evidence. That's including her clothing and possessions. And whilst her body is burning, he just gets on with his normal life. I find the way that somebody deals with a corpse very telling, because you can see he had absolutely no care or consideration for this life, and he had no care and consideration for the impact on the family of this life. Because not being able to identify your child, not being able to hold your child for the last time before you send them on their way to the next universe, dimension, whatever you believe, is a crime in itself. To not be allowed those final seconds to see their face, to stroke their hair, to say that you love them. To deny a family that means that you have absolutely no connection to what love is. All you care about is your own needs. Wayne Couzens cares only about his own needs. After he's done this, bear in mind the significance of what's just happened. Again, he just goes and buys food and drink for himself, and he actually makes a vet's appointment for the family dog. So he obviously cares more about his dog's life and his dog's health than anybody else's in the family potentially, and certainly in the wider world around him. We do see that with psychopaths. Psychopaths tend to have more of a connection with a dog because they own it fully and the dog is loyal to them whatever, and the dog will just accept them however they are. So again, it's ego and narcissism that does that. Now later on that same day, he goes back to Hodeswood and he gets Sarah's body and he puts her body into a builder's bag that he's bought from B&Q. He then dumps her in a nearby pond, and we know why. Remember, he works in the force. If you really want to cause a problem with DNA and forensics, you put them either somewhere really hot or somewhere really wet. It aids and abets the body decomposing. Now, there is a shift to some degree in his movements at this point, because he should have gone to work on the 6th of March, but he doesn't. He makes a pile of excuses as to why he doesn't go in. And then on the 8th of March, he actually reports himself ill. He says that he's really stressed and he's suffering and he doesn't want to carry a gun anymore. Now, on one level, we could say, oh, is this a prick of conscience that he realises what he's done and he doesn't want to have access to something that could cause harm to others? I don't think that's the case. I don't think we should give Wayne Couzens any prick of conscience. I would imagine that he's probably trying to make himself look like an individual with empathy, sensitivity, anxiety and concern about his wider world around him, and therefore to create an illusion that he isn't an individual devoid of any emotional cogency. That's what I think. So he doesn't want to appear a potential predator, and the best way to do that is to appear really sensitive and like you can't really manage in your job. That, I think, is the reason he does that. Because also, during this period when he's meant to be like super stressed and about to give up his job and hand in his firearms, he goes on a day trip with his family to the woods where he burned and disposed of Sarah's body. Now, to me, and I said this on TV the other day, I think that is real clear power play. You are going and you are enjoying your fantasy, you're returning to the scene of the crime, you're allowing yourself the sexual connection with that because that was the lust killing that was carried out, and yet you've got your family there and they know nothing. You are the wolf in sheep's clothing. You are the evil in the goodness, and they don't know. And you're fixating and enjoying and fantasizing about what's happened here whilst living what's happening here. That dual experience for Wayne Couzens was obviously very titillating. That's why he goes there, in my opinion. Simultaneously, while he's eating cake and drinking hot chocolate and chilling with his family and getting his dog booked in at the vets, Sarah Everard's family are utterly frantic. Because instantly they know something isn't right. Sarah's gone off radar completely. She's not in contact with her family. Her mobile isn't ringing out. Her WhatsApp messages aren't getting through. And her boyfriend's instantly been in contact with the police because she was meant to meet him the next day and she didn't come. So they are already deeply concerned about the possibilities and potentials of what's happened to this girl. Straight away, police get involved, volunteers get involved, family members get involved. They're all searching Clapham Common. They're doing house-to-house inquiries. And because of the complex nature of this case, the investigation gets led by the Met's Specialist Crime Command Unit. Now, they are brought in because they think something really sinister has happened. That's why these people are brought in. And obviously, their main priority is to get Sarah returned. They don't know at this point she's already dead. Bear in mind, the first 24 hours are absolutely essential. I'm going to be honest with you, the first 3 hours are really, really, really important. You know, when it gets longer than that and people are missing, we're looking at 24 hours, often it isn't a good reality when it comes down to the resolving that crime. Often the body turns up as opposed to the living person. They take a few days and then they find Sarah's burnt remains, 10th of March. And it was actually police dogs that managed to identify Sarah Everard's body in that pond in Kent. Her body was found just 100 metres from the plot of land that Wayne Couzens owned. On the 12th of March, forensics determined that Sarah was the victim. They managed to look at her dental records and they correlated that she was the body that had been found. But she was so badly burnt that, like I said, the family didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye. They didn't have the opportunity to kiss her forehead, to mutter those words that they needed to say before they said goodbye fully. And that to me is just beyond belief that somebody can steal that. I know it sounds ridiculous that we should want to actually see that person for that last time in that last moment, but believe me, if you have a child, that's all you want to do. And she was this beautiful young woman and he maimed her. He stole that from that family. The last time you'll have ever seen her will have been alive. And like I said, there's no process and ritual to just having a closed coffin. When they did the post-mortem, they found that it was compression of the neck that had killed her. And it's this point that the police start focusing on CCTV. The thing about the capital is it's everywhere, literally in London, probably like in New York and big cities in other countries. It is literally everywhere. You can track somebody walking all the way across London. So they start exploring that footage and pretty much from the get-go, Couzens is identified because they have great quality CCTV and they can see who this person is and then they can start tracking them. So Couzens gets arrested really quickly, 9th of March at his home in Deal, Kent. A beautiful place in the world, Deal, absolutely gorgeous. I know this sounds ridiculous to say, but it's not the place that you would imagine an individual like this would come from. It's picturesque. It's the kind of place that you'd want to take your children for a holiday. Simple as that. It's an expensive place to live as well. You can hardly imagine that there is this predator living in those streets, visiting that beach, being in that community. And then the following day, they actually say that he's been arrested on suspicion of murder. So they take it to that next level. And this comes from the fact that they have so much evidence. There's a wealth of evidence against him. So the CPS say, go ahead, charge him with kidnap and murder. And then they get the forensics because that is going to take it to the next stage. They don't know at this point what he did with the body. They just believe that he definitely was responsible for the murder of the person. But then they note, yeah, we've looked at this body forensically. The remains that are there, evidence that Sarah Everard was also raped. I am going to put in the footage of him being arrested, but just note how he responds when police officers ask him about whether he has anything to do with Sarah's disappearance. And he's very clearly able to say, no, nothing to do with me. They show him a picture. He says, nope, don't know who she is. But, I mean, the change in his story is laughable as far as being something that people would believe, but also chilling that he would be an individual who could just create this fantasy.
So we're here to talk to you about Sarah. I'm going to show you a picture. Do you know Sarah?
I don't know.
Okay. Sarah went missing. I'll show you some pictures of her on the day.
Okay.
Sarah went missing on Wednesday, and her parents obviously and her family are really worried about her now. The inquiry that's been conducted so far has led us to come and speak to you about it and to see what you know about Sarah. Okay. So, would you like to? Do you know where Sarah is?
No.
Right. Okay. Do you know anything about what happened to her?
I know that she went missing up in London somewhere. About a week ago or so. Just from what I got on the news.
Okay. Have you ever personally met her?
No, not personally, man.
Have you had any interactions with her at all?
No, why would I have personal interactions with her?
Well, it's very difficult because I can't go into a lot of the evidence because obviously that would require, that's not part of what an urgent interview is, okay? This interview is just about trying to find her. Because
Sure.
she's been missing for a while now.
I'm sat in handcuffs and you're asking me why I know her. So you must have something to say that I know her.
Well, as I said, you've been arrested on suspicion of kidnap, and we believe that you've been involved in her disappearance and taking her away from her family.
Okay.
So we are trying to find her. Obviously, everybody is very worried about her. She's got, parents. She's got, she's got siblings. She's got a boyfriend. There's a lot of people that care about her.
Sure.
You've seen her on the news. The number of people that are reaching out about her.
Sure.
Out there looking for her every day, and she's missing. And our job, our primary job here, is to find her and to try and find her safe and well.
Okay.
Now, we believe that you know something about where she is, and that's why we're here, to look for her and to try and find her. And that's why we're talking to you now, is to try and get you to have a good think about it and tell us anything you can about where we might be able to find her.
Okay. Well, I am in financial, and I've been lent on by I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever. And they told me, right, I need to go and pick up girls and give them to them. So I said, not happening. And it then came through that they're going to harm my family, take them away, and they'll use them instead. At that point I had no option to try and find somebody. So I don't, there's a couple of names. I was told a place to take her. That's it. That is all I know. I handed it to this group of people.
Tell me about them. I need to find her. Tell me everything you know that I
Okay.
think that you'll help me.
There was a white Sprinter van. They it was between sort of Lenham, Maidstone area that I dropped her off. I still don't know. I don't know. They just I just parked my car up, and then the van come up behind me, flashed me. They all jumped out, and then they took this girl. They said you've done good, and I don't know whether my family's going to be alright still. But they threatened to take my family away from me. So at that point, I'm doing what I can to protect my family. That's it. So all I know is that it was a roundabout. We could drive there now. I could show you. But roughly, I don't know Lenham, Maidstone area at all.
If we did it on Google, Maps, like Google Earth, if we drove it, would you
Right.
be able to do it?
I drove from Ashford to Maidstone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There's a roundabout that breaks up, I guess. So this is the first big roundabout that you come to. And you would carry straight over, to Maidstone, but instead I went round that roundabout and back up another road, and at that point I was flashed and pulled over. 3 guys got out, opened my door, opened that door, pushed me out against the front of the car, took the girl, drove off. That's it. They said we'll be in touch. So I'm here, I'm off work with stress because I'm here to protect my family. I want to be here 24/7 for my family. They come from my family. I've got nothing myself. I've got no choice.
I'll go back through the route with you in a minute, alright? But how do they contact you? How did you contact them?
I tried to take over one of their call girls and rip her off. So she's told them, and they've got me. So
How do they, no, but what is, how do they contact you? How is it they've been in contact with you to make these threats?
they just tell me, be here. So Hotel Burston down in Folkestone, got to be here. Okay, so I turned up. But I've got no mobile number, and they have got my mobile number.
They haven't.
They're obviously outside watching, following. I just, honestly,
How are they telling you to be there? Or be there? How is it they're giving you those directions?
yeah, they'll come outside. So they'll be outside here,
Yeah.
and then they'll say, right, you're going to be in Folkestone at this time, or you're going to be in Ashford at this time. That's it. There's no links, no telephone numbers. I'm completely on my own, but at the same time being threatened. It had Romanian plates on the van, white.
So he says, actually, you know what? I've lied to you. And you know, you get this with offenders. They think that if they can tell a part truth, saying that actually I was deceitful, that people will be like, oh, he's admitted to lying, so therefore he must be telling the truth when he tells us about this really crazy story that he's going to think about. That's the way that a lot of people come across. You'll note that in lots of confessions, where they kind of take claim for something that's implicating them as a negative person, but then they create this big backstory to say, well, even though I'm a really negative person for doing that, actually there is a reason why and you should feel sorry for me. And he plays that card. He says, look, I did get involved in Sarah Everard's disappearance, but that's because I was forced by a criminal people trafficking gang from the Balkans to abduct women for them. Sorry, Wayne. What was that, Mr. Couzens? You work for the police. With access to the police, you know the law. And if there's a people trafficking gang from the Balkans, I'm pretty sure your superiors would want to know about them. But you're like, oh, I've been involved with prostitutes, so if I don't give them what they need, I'll get into trouble with who? Who are you getting in trouble with, Wayne Couzens? They've all been arrested by the people in the police that you've told. Doesn't make any sense, right? So he creates this crazy story that he's been forced by this criminal people trafficking gang to abduct women for them, and that he had no choice because they were threatening his family. Which, again, the police would have sorted out. They don't like members of the police being threatened. They're really against it. And his backstory for why they had this on him was basically he'd been using sex workers, got into debt with sex workers, and to chase up this debt, he had to abduct Sarah and then hand her over to this trafficking gang. And when he did that, she was safe and well. Again, completely skewed. So what's that, Wayne? You took an innocent person off the street, a woman just walking home, arrested her falsely, and then you handed her over to a people trafficking gang, and you're like, but she was fine. No, she wouldn't have been. She'd have been in a people trafficking gang and would have been in a horrific situation. So can you see how he's using this to try to implicate himself, but not in the actual disposal and murder of this poor woman? He also, and this really annoys me, said, but you know what? I will help you in any way to get Sarah back. Bear in mind, we know what he's done. He gave a really detailed account to the police, and every single part of that detailed account was BS. Complete lie. And the police are obviously able to look at Wayne Couzens' movements. They get the CCTV and they can see he's not telling the truth. They also note that he tried to erase all of his phone records. That's just before the police arrived at his home. He did this through a factory reset, but as we all know, I mean, this is what gets me about offenders that think that they're really sophisticated. Oh, they're not. They're not. Everybody knows that you can't just wipe things. Phone companies can get pretty much everything, even the stuff you wish that they couldn't. They can, and they do. It's one of those things that we see regularly. Also, the hire car. So Couzens actually says, no, I only hired it because I was having some problems with my own. But they instantly get his SEER and are like, well, we'll just do an inspection of that. And guess what? There were no mechanical issues with your car, and it doesn't seem that you've booked any of your cars into a service situation to get fixed. So you're lying there as well. On the 8th of June 2021, Couzens pleads guilty to the kidnap and rape of Sarah. And then on the 9th of July 2021, he also pleads guilty to a murder. The sentencing took place on the 30th of September 2021. We're talking a couple of weeks ago. Lord Justice Fulford was in charge of the proceedings at the Old Bailey. Now, the punishment for murder in the UK is an automatic life sentence. Bear in mind, it's very different from a life sentence in the States on the whole. Full life sentences and tariffs in the UK are incredibly rare. We believe in restorative justice, we believe in rehabilitation, even when Colin Pitchfork shouldn't have it, but we do. People who shouldn't be out are out, in my opinion. Don't think you get to murder children and then just get on with your life at any age. But I'm not making the rules. If I was, people like him would be in prison. If you haven't watched the Colin Pitchfork episode I've done, you want to do it, because that guy is walking the streets right now. Now, the judge has to establish at this point what is the appropriate tariff, because you need to look at what would be the minimum time this individual could spend in prison before being safely eligible for parole, or at least being considered for parole. Now, the judge has to look at circumstances, and some of these involve mitigation. So factors that could have led to this individual acting in this way. I need to look at those, listen to them, and see whether that reduces the idea of sentence that I am going to place on this human being. So the mitigation comes in, and it says that Wayne Couzens had been suffering from mild depressive disorder at the time that he murdered Sarah. He was experiencing financial difficulties, he had difficulty sleeping, and he also suffered from bouts of tinnitus. Man, in the past year and a half, I have suffered from financial difficulties. I definitely have had insomnia, and I have tinnitus from a crash that I had when I was 21, and it's way loud. I've never yet thought to myself, what I'm going to do now is just go murder some innocent victim because, I'm having a bit of a bad time, and this ringing in my ears is driving me insane. No. Sorry. I'm not the judge. I'm just saying no. Anyway, expert opinion basically came in and said, yeah, a lot of people are depressed. Massive amount of people in the UK, for example, on antidepressants right now. None of them are out murdering people, believe me. If they were, it would be like the purge. Literally. Not a link. Other mitigating factors that they brought in was that he had a clean record and a supportive character reference from some work colleagues. I wonder whether they're work colleagues who are being investigated right now for all the inappropriate things they were sharing with each other online. Could that be the kind of supportive character references they were getting? I'm making assumptions. I'm just saying massive investigation going on for lots of inappropriate connections online. Although saying that, I will also acknowledge that sometimes I text really inappropriate things to people for fun, not thinking that there's any potential that those things would ever be used against me. So I do appreciate we have different levels of connections with people around us that we like and trust. But nonetheless, these are people at work that he was texting and sharing stuff with, and it was not acceptable material. The fact as well that he's got these character references blows my mind. Because if I was a police officer at work and this guy had just got brought in for murder and rape and disposal of a body of an innocent person, I would be like, screw you, Wayne Couzens, you murdering psychopath. Rot in hell. That's why I do the job, isn't it? So that I can do that to people who hurt people. Maybe we should look at the people who gave him supportive references. I'm just saying, I would be really worried about somebody who did that. I don't know how you can defend the indefensible just because he was a diligent little cookie at work. So was Dennis Nilsson. So was Ed Kemper at times. Dennis Rader, most definitely. Even the Green River Killer. Ted Bundy at times. All had reasonable people around them who thought that they were nice human beings, but you're a step further when you actually give somebody a reference. Okay, one of the things I'll say about Wayne Couzens is he did plead guilty. He did say, I did it. And that means, as I said earlier on, the family have been able to avoid that trial, which they didn't deserve to go through. One of the defences that he put out there was that he said, in mitigation against what happened, I was quite confused before, during and after the killing, but I think that any judge with a GCSE in even cookery would be able to see through that. Because look at the way he planned this. Just think about the meticulous level that was involved in this. He went through all of the details very, very efficiently. Does that sound confused? Does that sound vague? He even hired a car? Doesn't sound very confused to me. Also, he said, look, I didn't actually intend to kill Sarah. It was only after I'd kidnapped and raped her and that I thought, this is what I'm going to have to do. But again, the judge didn't accept this because the facts of the case suggested otherwise. To all of us watching this, to people who know the case, certainly to Sarah's family, I think we can all agree that Couzens did not want to leave a witness. You know, he identified himself as a police officer. That would have narrowed down a massive list of people who were possible suspects. There was at no point an attempt to disguise himself or to conceal his identity from Sarah. Why? Because he fully intended to kill her. She wouldn't be alive to report him. Even though arguably we could say, well, he did purchase the petrol after he'd murdered Sarah, therefore was it that he actually wanted to kill her? Was it something that happened just as a spontaneous action? No, because he'd planned it so efficiently. He probably knew that this was a good way to affect forensics and to cause more issues in actually getting to recognise who this victim was. So aside from the petrol, we can also note all of the planning that went into it was all about avoiding detection, and that's the same with setting fire to a body, is to avoid detection. So ultimately, the prosecution argued that a whole life tariff should be imposed. Now this, as I said, is incredibly rare. So the guidelines are set out in paragraph 2 of Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020. This includes the murder of 2 or more persons where each murder involves any of the following. 1, a substantial degree of premeditation or planning. 2, the abduction of the victim. Or 3, sexual or sadistic conduct. Now in Sarah's case, there was a substantial amount of planning, abduction, and sexual conduct. However, draw your attention to the first point, it's meant to be 2 or more victims. In this case, as we know, there was only 1 victim. So when you look at that guidance, it doesn't technically fit guidance for imposition of a full life term. But that said, lawmakers couldn't predict every scenario justifying a whole life term, right? So that is guidance. It isn't absolute law. You know, there are always ways of justifying a particular belief system in a sentence, and the judge absolutely does. So the judge felt that there were really serious aggravating factors. First of all, an aggravating factor is the offence was committed by a serving police officer who's acting as if he's on duty. So that's a massive breach of an individual who's meant to serve and protect us. The judge also stated that police have huge powers, which means that they can coerce and control people, and that puts them in an exceptional category. Also, the judge said, look, this was a massive breach of trust. The police are there to act in the public interest, and Wayne Couzens did the absolute opposite. In fact, Wayne Couzens used his position to exploit the very role that he was there to protect him. Also, the judge said, we expect police to act lawfully, and Couzens undermined that. He undermined the whole representation in law and order. And the other thing that was really important the judge brought forward was that it was an attack on the fundamental underpinnings of our very democratic way of life. And the fact that there was loads of planning involved. He hunted for a victim, he hired a car, he planned a route, he attempted to dispose of the body, and he also kidnapped and raped an innocent victim. Also, the drive in itself, the 80 miles to Dover, would have put her in a complete state of trauma and terror, and the physical and psychological experience that she would have gone through would have been heinous. He showed no remorse when he was being questioned initially about this. You know, he was just denying he was involved, and he got on with his life completely normally without any apparent problems. And most importantly as well, on top of all of that, he tried to lie and cover his tracks. He didn't want to get caught. Ultimately, And I think, very fortunately, the judge said, because of these factors, you are going to get a whole life term. As in, you are never going to be free again. And we all know how police get treated when they go to prison. Just saying, not a good place. Not a good place for anybody who happened to work in law enforcement to go for a long time. Prisoners don't like police officers a lot. Particularly police officers who rape and murder innocent girls. The judge also stated that the misuse of a police officer's role to kidnap, rape and murder a lone victim is of equal seriousness as a murder for the purpose of advancing a political or religious ideological cause, essentially putting it in the context of terrorism. The judge was very empathic towards Sarah Everard's family, and rightfully so. He referred to the devastating impact that had occurred for Sarah's family and her boyfriend and friends. And he made a really good point. He said that the fact that this was a police officer who did this, it had eroded the confidence that the public are entitled to have in the police force within England and Wales. Now, I will also note, because the police are getting a hell of a lot of backlash in the UK for this, but we also have to be very honest and acknowledge the amount of effort that they put into resolving this case. And the judge did praise the police work in this case and said it was the most impressive police investigation that he'd ever encountered in his 30 years as a judge. He praised the speed of the investigation and arrest. And also he said that he noted that no one had tried to close ranks, so there hadn't been this desire to protect one of their own, so to speak. Couzens has never actually fully commented on his motivation to commit the offence, but what we do know is, in spite of that, fortunately, he will essentially die in prison. He's one of the few people to ever be given a whole life term. Other examples of people serving a whole life tariff are people I've covered in my true crime: Rose West, Levi Belfield and Joanna Dennehy. They are seen as individuals incapable of rehabilitation. It's as simple as that. Sarah's family gave a statement in court about the impact of her death, and her mother, Susan Everard, said, "Sarah is gone. I am brokenhearted. She was my precious little girl, our youngest child. The feeling of loss is so great, it's visceral." You can completely connect with that. Sarah's father, Jeremy Everard, said, "The impact of what you have done will never end. The horrendous murder of my daughter, Sarah, is in my mind all the time and will be for the rest of my life." Her sister, Katie Everard, said, "I feel like I live in a make-believe world, as if nothing is real. I have to pretend because the thought of not having Sarah forever is too hard to bear. A lifetime now seems like a very long time." I've worked with families of individuals who've been murdered, and I can say that that really resonates with me. I've also experienced traumatic grief myself, and I can tell you that it does transform your life, and life does feel like a very long time. It feels never-ending between when you have seen them last and when you may see them again, depending on your belief system. Now, Sarah's murder, as I said, has raised a lot of red flags. It's why I've been on TV this last week, because I've been talking about the fact that this raises a lot of questions, particularly for the police force, for example. And you have to think about one of the investigating experiences right now is looking at how the police officers are actually sanctioned to do what they do. There were a lot of red flags in the past that, personally looking into this crime and certainly reading about it from other people's expert testimony, we agreed that there could have been an opportunity to avoid this tragedy. The investigation established 27 people working for the Met Police. 27 people working for the Met Police committed offences including rape and possessing indecent images of children since 2016. 2016, 27 members of the Met Police committing those offences. 27, and that's including Couzens. Also, a vetting check when Couzens joined the Met failed to flag up that his car had been linked to an alleged incident of indecent exposure in Kent in 2015. indecent exposure. Now, I appreciate that there is a stretch between indecent exposure and murder, but let me tell you, lots of serial killers have killed and then done things like indecent exposure in between killing again. So we don't have to just see this as an escalation in his behaviour. It can be that this is a consistent theme in his paraphilia, his sexual predilection. But it's deeply worrying that in 2015 he's seen driving naked in his car and no one does anything about it. And it's been reported. Who would think that that was an appropriate individual to serve and protect us? And apparently he'd been driving naked from the waist down. If you think about being on a bus, it's very easy to see into people's cars. It would be quite traumatizing. Police did investigate this, but they didn't take any further action. It means that when they looked at him and vetted him, he wasn't subject to an enhanced vetting, because one of the problems that the Met have had is recruiting new police officers. And the reason for this, they believe, is to do with the 2017 Paris terror attacks, that they needed to get a lot of new officers and they were struggling to. So to actually get them in more quickly, they did this lower vetting just to get people in jobs. Worrying. We don't want to lower our standards when it comes down to the kind of people that get to protect us, arrest us, and all the things in between. Also, there were reports that Couzens had indecently exposed himself twice in a McDonald's car park in Swanley, Kent, days before kidnapping Sarah. Days. Now, the Met say that the reports had been allocated for investigation when Sarah was killed, but hadn't been investigated at that point. I think the reality is that they just weren't taken seriously. Because why weren't they formally investigated by the police at that time? It's a really serious assault on somebody when you indecently expose yourself to them. That's a person who's not willing to be in that situation. You're not willingly part of that consensual experience sexually. So what on earth are we doing allowing that to play out? Particularly if you do a search and you realise it's a serving police officer. Now, I cannot comment on how the independent inquiry is going to play out, but there is an investigation by the Independent Office of Police Conduct, which is looking into these issues and misdemeanours that have occurred. I do think that what we're hearing here in this moment is that in the UK, certainly, and maybe elsewhere in the world, indecent assault for some bizarre reason isn't necessarily considered a sexual offence. It's crazy. It's believed that 1 in 5 women are actually subjected to indecent exposure. It's happened to me twice in my life. Once when I was on a French trip in Paris when I was 11. Loads of us got completely flashed by this guy for quite a sustained period of time whilst we were waiting for our coach to leave. And the second time was when I was 23. And a guy did it in broad daylight in the street. I won't tell you what I said to him, but if he ever had issues about the insignificance of him as a male, then I will have definitely additionalized them. That's all I'm saying. But I didn't go to the police. I should have gone to the police. But I was brought up in a society where people were like minimizing this behavior, where it was just seen as an oddball who just flashes you. There were even postcards when I was growing up that kind of minimized it and made it seem like hijinks. It's just a man having fun. Now I realize it's a severe violation on my privacy and my experience of safety in the world. And we have to take it more seriously. The fact that 1 in 5 women say that they've seen somebody do this probably means that there's a miles higher figure. And the truth is that's because women don't report it, because we're made to feel that it's not really that big a deal. In fact, it's shocking that until 2003, it wasn't actually considered a sexual offence at all. So until 2003, you could just indecently expose anyone and you wouldn't get into trouble. In fact, they classed it as a nuisance offence. It's just a bit of a nuisance. It's just being a bit of a nuisance with his penis, isn't he? It's just being a bit of a nuisance, whapping that out everywhere. It's not a nuisance. He's a sexual predator. He's an individual who is choosing to engage with you in a sexual manner that you are not prepared or consenting to. And it is highly offensive, violating, and traumatising. And sadly, it's also an indicator of future harm. Because culprits can go on to have sexual offences that involve contact offences, i.e. rape, assault. That in itself says that we need to do so much more to alert people in our society, both males and females, who see this kind of behaviour and act on it. Because unfortunately, people who are sexually deviant get off on that deviance in many ways, not just one. So if I'm an individual who wants to rape a woman, I may at other times be an individual who wants to shock a woman. I just want to make sure that I'm in control and they are an individual without that control. I exploit their vulnerability. Now, so far, it is worth noting that a total of 12 gross misconduct or misconduct notices have been served on police officers from several forces relating to Couzens' case. So clearly they are taking this incredibly seriously, and it's clear that they're wanting to weed out officers who are problematic in the force. The police watchdog are also investigating 5 officers over claims that they shared misogynistic, racist and homophobic material with Couzens over WhatsApp, and that was just months before he killed Sarah. So highly inappropriate sharing of material. These are men, and potentially women, who are meant to have our best interests at heart, and they're sharing misogynistic, racist and homophobic material with one another just before he goes out and murders this innocent woman. And the investigation has also revealed that at least 15 serving or former UK police officers have killed women since 2009. Let that sink in. I'll just tell you that again. 15 serving or former UK police officers have killed women since 2009. Shocking, right? And I don't want to be down on the police, because let me tell you, equally, the amount of suicides of police officers are more than have died in active service in the past few years. So considerably more. So, you know, whilst we do have killers in the police, we also have individuals who are dealing with horrible levels of desperation and horrible things that they've witnessed, and the consequence is that they end their own lives. So I'm not trying to be down on the police. I'm saying that it's really important when things like this occur that things are investigated and we learn lessons, right? We learn lessons. Those police officers I've just talked about, most of them killed their partners. So it was domestic homicide. Because of all of these things being brought to the forefront, the Met have said it's going to publish a new strategy for tackling violence against women and girls, and that it will no longer deploy plain clothes officers on their own. And I think that's really important because it makes people concerned about the trust level that they have in those meant to be protecting them. I struggle genuinely with the advice that women in the UK have been given about this situation. I'm going to tell you what it is, and you can make your own minds up as to whether you connect with it. But the current advice to women who basically are approached by a police officer and they're like, I don't know whether I trust you, is to, 1, call 999. I mean, there's somebody with handcuffs coming up to you in the street telling you you're going to get arrested, and you're like, hang on a minute, I'm just going to ring 999. It takes balls of steel to do that, and you're confused and shocked because you've got a police officer coming to arrest you. 2, to shout to a passerby, help me, there's a police officer arresting me. How many passersby are going to be like, well, it's okay, do I stop that? It's like, it's a police officer, they're arresting you, isn't that what's going to happen? You know, again, not the best advice. 3, run into a house and wave a bus down. What if there isn't a house or a bus? And also, I'm being arrested by somebody. Isn't it bad to run away from a police officer? Isn't that called resisting arrest? I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there that it's a bit confusing for us women and men hearing that kind of information. Because we're talking about a situation that plays out really quickly, and how on earth can I genuinely know if this is real or not, and how can I get the wherewithal to act in this situation? And what if I act in this situation and I get in more trouble because I've acted in this situation? Because you know what? Wayne Couzens was a genuine officer. He had the right stuff with him. The automatic feeling is often to trust. What the argument should be is, you don't need to worry about police officers on the street coming up and arresting you, because they will be real police officers with a real reason to arrest you, and you'll be safe. Why should we have to protect ourselves against police officers now? A whole heap of crazy. Information has also come to light to let you know that his colleagues used to call him the rapist. That was his nickname. I wonder whether those calling him the rapist also wrote his character references while sharing misogynistic information on WhatsApp together. Just saying. The reason that they called him a rapist, by the way, and that was his nickname, was because he had this really clear reputation of making all his female colleagues feel really uncomfortable. And that was particularly in reference to when he worked at the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. It seems that Couzens had a really sinister side. There were lots of allegations that have come out about him, like he had a reputation for drug abuse, he liked extreme pornography, he was also attracted to violent sexual pornography. I appreciate that lots of people can take recreational drugs and look at hardcore porn and be really nice human beings, but we also acknowledge that people like Ted Bundy specifically directed us to understand the impact of hardcore porn on his predilections and tipping him over from having these fantasies to acting out in reality. We have to listen to this information. We can't just go around saying it's okay for everybody to look at hardcore pornography and that this is normal in our society and that women like that kind of information being out there and that we all really want that kind of experience sexually. It's not true. It really doesn't do a great deal of good for our society, our community, or our relationships. Just putting it out there. Just putting it out there. That we can see an increase in violent crime sexually as we can in line with the more and more gratuitous aggression in pornography. At the time that he killed Sarah, he was also $29,000 in debt. What do we know about killers? We know that stressors mean that often they look for a way of de-stressing, and killing is part of that MO. So when you look at serial killers, and I keep bringing in serial killers because I will be very surprised if he hasn't killed before, when you explore when they killed, it was usually at pivotal moments of stress. So he fits that as well. They also found that he'd set up dating profiles on Match.com using false details where he claimed to have no wife or kids. I bet his wife and kids are quite glad about that. You know what, Wayne? You just distance yourself from us. We don't want you as a father or a partner. We just want you to go and rot in hell or in jail until you get to hell, because certainly they'll have a special place in hell for you. He was also at the time in contact with a female escort, and when acquaintances were questioned about him, they said he displayed some pretty unusual behaviour in the past, particularly when he was in his 20s. He dated a girl aged 14. Again, guys, if you know somebody in their 20s dating a girl or a boy who's 14, report them. It's a crime. And it's a crime that, if dealt with then, can prevent horrible things escalating in the future. What happened to Sarah is an absolute tragedy. It's inconceivable that you can be walking home at 9 p.m. after being with a friend, minding your own business, being a great pro-social human being to society with an amazing future, loved beyond reason by your family, and you can end up how Sarah Everard ended up. But as I said, I think that Couzens has probably committed way more offences in the past. I think probably he's been abusing his position for years. I think that's why he chose his job. I believe that it's highly unlikely that the abduction, rape and murder was his first offence. Usually these things build up. I mean, personally, I think I want to ask the question that I've kind of been posing through all of this. Could Wayne Couzens have been a serial killer in plain sight? Could he have been a serial killer working for the very forces that are meant to protect us? And I would be really surprised if that isn't the case. Time will tell. Maybe we'll revisit this. Maybe there'll be a point where he does start talking about other crimes. We know that serial killers in the end like to let people know about their work, and also with respect. The fact is he's got a life sentence where he's never going to walk. So I would imagine that at some point he's probably going to want to have that ego met, and maybe then we'll find out about other individuals that he's harmed. Whatever the results of that, the truth is that what matters more than anything is that Sarah Everard's family are given the justice that they deserve. And there is really no justice that can be heaped on Wayne Couzens that will symbolise what level of justice that they deserve as a family to dole out on that human being. It will be cold for them that he gets to live his life day in, day out forever. Of course it will. And they're justified in those feelings. Society lost a shining light, an individual of great potential, a woman loved diligently by her family. And the fact that she doesn't get to breathe again when he gets to have 3 meals a day in a prison, not in relative comfort, but safe to some degree, and living his days out with healthcare and dental care, it's just unfair, isn't it? And a lot of my American viewers, you will all have views on whether this man should be allowed to breathe. It's as simple as that. But we have different rules in the UK. I think all our feelings go out to this family. She didn't deserve what happened. No one deserves that. And it's just a stark reminder that we have to do more to protect people on our streets. We have to do more when we notice things happening, like an individual being stopped and arrested. It's our job, our voice, to give them legacy, to protect them. So maybe we all need to be a little bit more vigilant with our eyes and our ears. And it's better to call the police and say you're seeing something that you don't agree with and that concerns you, and be found that actually it was an innocent situation. You still made a job and duty there to protect that person that you were looking at. So just try to think that way. And like I said, the beginning, middle and end of this is that a woman or a man should be allowed to walk the streets wearing what they want, doing what they want, as long as they're being a law-abiding citizen, and never end up like Sarah Everard did. Like I said, it might be one that we revisit, because as things come out, we might learn more and more about this particular individual. But personally, I think we have got a seriously dangerous human being off the streets, albeit too late off the streets. Take care. Thank you for listening. I hope that you found this interesting, and I hope that you feel that he's got the comeuppance that he deserves, and I hope that you will agree when we send out positive thoughts and feelings to Sarah Everard's family, who do not deserve to be in the position they are. Join me next time for another True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. I release my content Wednesdays and Sundays. If you haven't subscribed and you've liked what you've seen here, please do subscribe and you'll get notified so that you can never miss another moment of my content. Take care, chaps. Be safe.